The bank was busy that morning. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, catching the polished marble floors and the hum of whispered conversations. Men in tailored suits and women clutching designer handbags moved with ease, chatting about vacations, investments, and the stock market. Yet as Danielle Carter walked through the front doors, the air seemed to shift. Eyes flickered toward her, quick but sharp, as if her presence had disrupted the rhythm of the room. Danielle carried herself with quiet confidence. At 32, she had learned how to move through spaces that weren't built for her. She wore a crisp navy suit, her hair neatly pulled back, her stride purposeful. But she also knew the truth. No matter how professional, no matter how calm, the world rarely saw beyond the color of her skin. She approached the counter, a check tucked safely in her folder. $25,000, clean and legitimate. Payment for weeks of work on an FBI operation that had drained her energy and tested her resilience. To her, the check was simple. To others, she knew it would not be. "Good morning," she said softly, placing the check on the counter in front of a young teller. The boy couldn't have been more than 20. His name tag read Ethan. Ethan glanced at the amount and his face tightened. His eyes darted to Danielle, then to the check again. As though the two could not belong together, he cleared his throat nervously. One moment, ma'am." Danielle folded her hands calmly on the counter. She had been here before in one form or another. Suspicion was a shadow that followed her everywhere, sometimes loud and harsh, other times subtle, tucked behind polite smiles. The teller disappeared into the back office. Danielle stood quietly, aware of the curious glances from customers nearby. A woman shifted her purse closer to her side. A man looked her up and down and then quickly away. The air was filled with unspoken judgment. Moments later, a man emerged from the back, tall, gray-haired, dressed in a pressed suit that spoke of authority. Mr. Caldwell, the manager. His smile was professional, but his eyes carried the weight of something else, something colder. "Ms. Carter, is it?" he asked, holding the check delicately between his fingers as though it might stain him. "Yes," Danielle replied evenly. He nodded slowly, his gaze sharp. "This is quite a large amount. Where exactly did you receive this?" Danielle's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone polite. "It's a reimbursement check. You can call the issuing company if you'd like." Caldwell's smile thinned. "We'll look into it." These kinds of checks, well, they often turn out to be fraudulent. The words were loud enough to carry. Danielle heard the whispers ripple through the line behind her. She felt the sting, sharp and familiar. She was used to being questioned, but the humiliation still pressed heavy. She thought briefly of her father, who had taught her resilience, of her mother, who had warned her that dignity would always be tested, of the years she had spent proving her worth in spaces that doubted her. And yet here she was again, standing in a bank, accused without evidence. Caldwell motioned to Ethan. "Call it in," he ordered quietly. Danielle's eyes narrowed. She leaned slightly forward. "There's no need for that. The check is legitimate. Please verify it with the company." Caldwell didn't answer her. Instead, he turned away, already pulling out his phone. Danielle straightened, her pulse steady but her chest heavy. She knew the storm had begun. Mr. Caldwell didn't even glance at Danielle as he spoke into the phone, his voice sharp and decisive. "Yes, I'd like officers sent to First Metro Bank. Possible fraudulent activity. Large amount. Suspicious behavior." The words pierced the room. Customers shifted uncomfortably, some trying not to stare, others openly watching. Danielle felt their eyes crawl over her suit, her skin, her very existence, as if they were measuring whether she fit the crime Caldwell had already written onto her. "Sir," she said firmly, her voice calm but resolute, "that check is valid. You haven't even attempted to call the company that issued it. If you'd simply..." Caldwell cut her off with a dismissive wave. "We have to be cautious. You can't be too careful these days. People come in with all sorts of stories." The pause before stories was deliberate. Danielle heard the unspoken accusation. "People like you." Then the teller shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Caldwell, maybe we could..." "Enough, Ethan," Caldwell snapped. "This is not the time for hesitation." Danielle's stomach churned, but her face remained composed. She had trained herself to hold her ground even in silence. But inside, the sting was raw. She thought of her father, pulled over once for fitting the description, his dignity shattered as officers searched their family car in front of neighbors. She thought of her mother, whispering late at night, "Respectability won't save you, baby. Some people see only what they want." Minutes later, the doors opened. Two uniformed officers entered briskly, their hands already near their belts, eyes scanning the room. Caldwell pointed dramatically in Danielle's direction. "That's her." The taller officer, badge glinting, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification." Danielle nodded calmly. "Of course. I have my driver's license right here." She reached slowly into her purse, practiced movements that showed she knew the rules of survival. The officer snatched the ID, glanced at it briefly, and then at Caldwell. "What's the issue here?" Caldwell leaned in. "She's trying to cash a suspicious check. Won't explain where it came from. It's probably fake," Danielle spoke firmly. "That's not true." I explained that it's a reimbursement from the issuing company. He refused to call them. The shorter officer smirked. "Yeah, well, people always have explanations." Her pulse quickened, but she steadied her breath. She could have ended this with one move, pulling out her FBI credentials. But something inside her told her to wait. She wanted the truth of their prejudice to be laid bare, not brushed aside once they saw her badge. The taller officer motioned to her folder. "Hand it over." Danielle passed the check calmly. He examined it briefly, then shook his head. "We're going to have to take you in until this can be verified." A murmur swept through the lobby. Someone whispered, "Knew it," while another muttered, "Figures." Danielle felt the words like stones. She raised her chin. "You're arresting me without evidence? Without even making a verification call?" The shorter officer's patience snapped. "Ma'am, stop resisting. Hands behind your back." Before she could respond, his hands were on her arms, yanking them behind her with unnecessary force. Cold steel pressed against her wrists as the cuffs clicked shut. Gasps echoed through the bank. A child pointed. A woman pulled out her phone, recording. Danielle stood tall even in chains, her voice clear though laced with quiet fury. "This is humiliation, not justice." Caldwell crossed his arms, lips curling into a smug smile. "Thank you, officers. We have to protect our customers from this kind of behavior." Her chest burned with anger. She thought of the years she'd spent in training, proving herself worthy to carry the badge of her country. She had faced criminals, investigated conspiracies, risked her life. Yet here she was, treated like nothing more than a thief because of her skin and a biased assumption. As the officers led her toward the door, whispers trailed behind her like a cruel chorus. Criminal, fraud. Another one caught. Danielle's thoughts turned inward. She remembered her mother's voice again. "Respectability won't save you." The suit, the professionalism, the calm demeanor. It had never been armor strong enough to protect her from prejudice. Her dignity had been stripped in public. She could feel the shame heavy in her chest. But beneath that shame, a spark of resolve began to burn. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "They think this is the end of the story. They don't know who I am," and with that, she let the officers lead her out into the flashing lights of the street. The squad car door slammed shut, and the world outside turned into muffled fragments of sound. Danielle sat stiffly on the cold vinyl seat, her wrists still cuffed behind her. The hum of the city dulled into the steady thrum of the engine. Through the tinted glass, she could see people staring, whispering as the cruiser pulled away. To them, she was just another criminal. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but shame pressed down on her chest. "Why should I have to prove my humanity over and over again?" she thought bitterly. It wasn't the first time she'd felt this way, but it was the sharpest. Memories rose uninvited. She was 10 again, standing in front of her classroom as the teacher handed back graded tests. Her paper had the highest score, but instead of praise, the teacher frowned and asked if she'd copied. She remembered the burn in her cheeks as her classmates snickered. Then college, where a professor questioned whether she was cut out for law enforcement training. His words had stung, but she'd smiled tightly, letting determination answer where words couldn't. And the FBI Academy, where male recruits mocked her as a diversity hire, whispering that she'd never survive the training. She had survived. She had excelled. And still, no matter how many walls she broke through, she kept finding herself here, Doubted, diminished, discarded. The car jolted to a stop at a red light. Danielle opened her eyes, catching a glimpse of herself in the window's reflection. The suit, the pressed collar, the neat hair, all the symbols of respectability she had carefully put on that morning now seemed useless. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Respectability won't save you, baby." Her throat tightened. For years, she had believed that excellence was her shield, that if she worked harder, stood taller, and spoke clearer, the world would have to respect her. But respectability had never been armor strong enough to stop prejudice. At the precinct, the officers led her inside, barely glancing at her as they filled out paperwork. She caught fragments of their casual conversation. "Another scammer," one muttered, shaking his head. "Yeah, easy collar," the other replied. Caldwell did the right thing. Their words stung more than the cuffs. They weren't even curious. They didn't care about facts. They had already written her story. Guilty until proven innocent, if proof was even allowed. They placed her in a holding cell, the metal bars clanging shut behind her. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, sharp and suffocating. Danielle sat on the bench, pressing her cuffed hands against the cold steel. Silence pressed in. She had the power to end this farce instantly. One word, one flash of her badge, and the game would be over. The officers would stammer apologies, Caldwell would be exposed, and her dignity restored. But something in her resisted. She wanted the system to reveal itself, to expose its own rot without her badge to excuse her. If she ended it too soon, they would claim it was all a misunderstanding. They would erase the cruelty, erase the humiliation, erase the truth. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Am I letting them win by staying silent? Am I giving them too much power over me? She leaned back against the wall, staring up at the flickering fluorescent light. She thought of her father's hands, rough from years of work, trembling the night he told her he'd been pulled over for nothing more than being black in the wrong neighborhood. He had looked at her with weary eyes and said, "Baby, they'll never see you the way you see yourself, but don't you let them take away who you are." Tears pricked Danielle's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't let them see her break, not now, not ever. The hours stretched in silence, punctuated only by the faint sounds of phones ringing and officers chatting down the hall. Danielle sat alone, her body still, but inside her chest a storm raged, fury, shame, and beneath it all, a quiet fire of resolve, she whispered to herself. So softly it barely broke the air. They think they know my story, but this isn't the ending. The hours passed slowly, the hum of the precinct a steady reminder of where Danielle sat. The officers who had arrested her barely glanced in her direction anymore. To them, she was already processed, another file in the system waiting to be stamped. Their casual laughter from across the hall made her skin prickle. So quick to dismiss me, so quick to assume guilt, she thought. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. A woman's voice, firm but not harsh, cut through the noise. "Where's the report on the check fraud?" Officer Ramirez stepped into view, a stack of folders in her hand. She was in her mid-30s, her dark hair tied back neatly, her expression sharp. Unlike the others, she didn't look past Danielle. She looked at her. Ramirez scanned the paperwork, her brow furrowing. "You didn't verify the issuing company? You didn't even run a call before making the arrest?" Her tone was pointed, almost incredulous. The arresting officer shrugged. "Manager said it looked suspicious. Big check." Woman got defensive. "We didn't want to take chances." Ramirez shot him a look that silenced his excuses. Then after a pause, she walked toward Danielle's cell. Danielle met her eyes, calm but unyielding, even as her wrists throbbed from the cuffs. "This doesn't add up," Ramirez said quietly, almost to herself. Then she addressed Danielle directly. "What's your name?" "Danielle Carter," she replied evenly. Ramirez nodded slowly. "You're awfully calm for someone accused of fraud." Danielle tilted her head, her voice steady. "Or maybe I've had enough practice being accused of things I didn't do." The words hung heavy in the air. Ramirez studied her for a long moment. There was something in Danielle's tone, something that spoke of strength and training, of experience beyond what the charges suggested. "Who are you, really?" Ramirez asked finally, lowering her voice. Danielle hesitated. Part of her still wanted to stay silent, to let the injustice unravel further. But she saw something different in Ramirez's eyes. Not arrogance, not suspicion, but curiosity mixed with integrity. It was the first time since the arrest that someone seemed willing to listen. "I'm more than what you think I am," Danielle said softly. "But right now, I need you to listen before I prove it." Ramirez leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Then tell me. Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't look like fraud. And I don't think you're who they say you are." Danielle took a slow breath. Her heart pounded, but her voice was calm. "Check my wallet. There's a badge inside." Ramirez's eyebrows arched. She glanced back toward the officers joking at their desks, then slipped her hand through the bars to take Danielle's wallet. Opening it, her eyes widened. The FBI credentials gleamed under the fluorescent light. She exhaled sharply. Danielle cut her off. "Yes? And now you see what prejudice looks like when it thinks it's right. Don't cover for them. Write it exactly as it happened." Ramirez closed the wallet carefully, her mind racing. She had seen bias before, had even fought against it quietly within the department. But this, an FBI agent humiliated and arrested without evidence, was something she couldn't ignore. "You could have stopped this the moment they touched you," Ramirez said. Her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Danielle's eyes darkened. "And if I had, they'd call it a misunderstanding. They'd erase the humiliation, erase the truth. No, I needed them to show their bias in full view. Now it's undeniable." For the first time since her arrest, Danielle felt the weight in her chest lighten, just a little. She wasn't alone anymore. Ramirez straightened, her expression hardening with resolve. "I'll handle this, but you have to back me up when the time comes. Can you do that?" Danielle nodded. "I've been waiting my whole life to do that." Ramirez gave a small, firm nod before walking back toward the desk, the wallet tucked securely in her hand. Danielle watched her go, a flicker of something rare stirring in her chest. Hope. The silence of the cell no longer felt as suffocating. For the first time since the bank, she wasn't just a target of prejudice. She was a witness preparing for her stand, and she wasn't standing alone. The next morning, Danielle was escorted into a conference room at the precinct. The air was heavy, every eye in the room carrying its own weight of expectation. Ramirez had pushed for this meeting, insisting that all involved, including Mr. Caldwell, the two arresting officers, and a precinct supervisor, be present. Danielle walked in wearing the same suit she had worn at the bank, her wrists now free but her dignity still bruised. She held her head high, her calm presence demanding more respect than any uniform in the room. Caldwell sat at the table, smug and self-satisfied. "Well," he began, folding his hands neatly, "I knew she was a fraud from the start. It was obvious. These scams are common, and frankly, I'm proud we acted quickly." The officers nodded in agreement, trying to look competent. One muttered, "We did what had to be done." Danielle took her seat slowly, her face unreadable. Ramirez stood near the back, silent but watchful. The supervisor cleared his throat. "Let's review this situation. Ms. Carter, would you like to begin?" Danielle's gaze swept the table. Her voice was calm, but each word was edged with steel. "Yesterday, I walked into a bank to deposit a legitimate check. I was treated as if I were a criminal before anyone attempted to verify its authenticity. I was humiliated publicly, arrested without evidence, and denied the basic courtesy of being heard." Caldwell leaned back, his smile smug. "We can't just take people at their word, especially when they don't fit the profile of someone handling that kind of money." The words hung in the air like poison. Danielle's hands tightened into fists under the table. She wanted to explode, to shout, but instead she reached into her folder and placed a small leather case on the table. She pushed it forward slowly, deliberately. The FBI badge caught the light, gleaming against the polished wood. The room fell silent. The smugness drained from Caldwell's face. The officers froze, their mouths slightly open. Ramirez crossed her arms, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. Danielle spoke again, her voice rising with power. "I am Special Agent Danielle Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And yesterday, I was treated like a criminal because of nothing more than the color of my skin and the assumptions you chose to make." Gasps rippled through the room. The supervisor leaned forward, stunned. You're an agent?" Danielle's eyes never left Caldwell. "You saw a black woman with a check and decided she must be a fraud. You never saw me as a person. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify facts. You decided who I was before I even opened my mouth, Caldwell stammered, his earlier confidence cracking. But we were just being cautious. Danielle cut him off sharply. Caution is checking facts. What you did was discrimination. What the officers did was humiliation. You paraded me out of that bank in handcuffs in front of strangers, as if I had stolen something. You didn't just question me. You condemned me. Her voice trembled now, but not with weakness, with righteous anger. I have spent my life proving I belong in rooms that were never built for me. At school I was doubted. At college I was underestimated. At the academy I was mocked. And still I rose. I put on this badge not because the world gave me permission, but because I earned it. But yesterday none of that mattered, because in your eyes I was still just another suspect. The taller officer swallowed hard, his face pale. We didn't know. Danielle's eyes pierced him. That's the point. You didn't care to know. You didn't give me the chance. You assumed guilt before you ever thought of innocence. And I wonder how many others have sat in this chair, stripped of dignity, without the power of a badge to prove you wrong. The room was silent. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance gone. He tried to recover, his voice faltering. Surely you understand, Agent Carter, that procedures... Procedures? Danielle snapped. Your procedure was bias disguised as caution. Your procedure was to protect the comfort of your customers by humiliating me. Don't talk to me about procedure. Her words cut through the room, leaving no escape. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, steady tone. You didn't just insult me. You insulted the very principles of justice, because justice cannot exist where prejudice decides who is guilty before the truth is spoken. Eleanor's silence stretched. Ramirez finally stepped forward, her voice clear. Agent Carter's account is accurate. I reviewed the arrest, the paperwork, and the manager's actions. There was no attempt to verify the check. The decision to call the police was made without evidence. This was discrimination, plain and simple. The supervisor sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. This is serious. Very serious. Danielle leaned back in her chair, her expression calm once more. But her words lingered like thunder. Yesterday you thought you had the power. But power isn't in the handcuffs you put on me, or the whispers in a bank lobby. Power is in truth. And today the truth is all yours to face. Caldwell's face reddened. The officers shifted uncomfortably. The weight of the truth pressed down on them. And for the first time, Danielle felt the balance tilt. The silence in the room was thick. But it wasn't empty. It was heavy with shame, with realization, with a shift that could not be undone. Danielle's dignity, once stripped, was restored, not by apology, not by their approval, but by her refusal to stay silent. The conference room emptied slowly, leaving behind only heavy silence and scattered papers. Mr. Caldwell's once proud posture had collapsed into a slump, his hands shaking as he gathered his belongings. The two arresting officers avoided Danielle's eyes, their earlier bravado swallowed by shame. The supervisor's voice was stern as he addressed them. This department will launch a full review. There will be accountability for every step of this incident. Make no mistake, this is not going away quietly. Caldwell muttered something about misunderstanding, but even his words sounded hollow. He was no longer the man in control, no longer the one with authority. His power had slipped through his fingers the moment Danielle placed her badge on the table. Danielle remained calm, watching them with a steady gaze. She had no need to shout anymore. The truth had spoken louder than any anger could. By the afternoon, word had already begun to spread. Someone at the bank had recorded her arrest on their phone, and the video was now circulating online. Headlines followed quickly. Black FBI agent wrongfully arrested at bank over fake check. Bias or procedure. FBI agent exposes bank's prejudice. Calls flooded the precinct and the bank's headquarters. Advocacy groups demanded reform. Strangers left messages of support. And for the first time, Danielle felt the tide shift, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been silenced in the same way. Reporters gathered outside the building, shouting questions as Danielle exited with Ramirez at her side. Microphones pushed forward, cameras flashing. Danielle paused, taking a deep breath before speaking. This wasn't about a check, she said firmly, her voice carrying over the crowd. This was about the assumption that because of the color of my skin, I couldn't be trusted. Yesterday, I was stripped of my dignity in front of strangers. But today, I stand here to say that justice cannot exist if we continue to judge people before we hear their truth. This isn't just my story. It's a story that belongs to too many. The crowd hushed, listening intently. Danielle continued, I don't want revenge. I want change. I want a world where my little nieces and nephews don't have to fear being humiliated for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Where walking into a bank doesn't mean walking into suspicion. Where dignity is not something you earn by status, but something you are owed as a human being. Her words rippled through the press like a stone dropped in water. Cameras captured her not just as an agent, but as a woman who carried resilience in every breath. Later that evening, Ramirez found her in the quiet of the precinct hallway. You handled that better than I think anyone else could have, she said softly. Danielle offered a small smile. Years of practice, she replied, though her eyes carried both weariness and strength. Ramirez shook her head. No, years of strength. Don't confuse the two. Danielle looked out the window at the city, lights flickering against the night. For so long, those lights had seemed like barriers, reminders of a world that kept her at the edges. Now they looked different, like possibilities waiting to be claimed. The following week, official apologies came. The bank issued a statement of regret, though its words rang hollow compared to the humiliation she had endured. The officers were placed under review, Caldwell quietly suspended, but the impact had already stretched further than any corporate apology could reach. Danielle received letters, emails, and calls from strangers across the country. Some were from people who had faced similar discrimination. Others were from young black students who said her story made them feel visible, like their dreams could not be stolen by prejudice. One message stood out most, a handwritten note from a young girl who wrote, I saw what you did. I want to be strong like you one day. Danielle pressed the letter against her chest, her throat tight with emotion. That was why she had stayed silent at first, why she had let the injustice play out. Not because she wanted to suffer, but because she wanted the truth to be undeniable, unerasable. And now, it was. As dawn broke the next morning, Danielle walked outside into the fresh air. The city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens in the distance, horns blaring, footsteps rushing. But for Danielle, the world felt different. She no longer carried the humiliation of the arrest. She carried the resilience of survival, the dignity of truth, and the quiet but unshakable knowledge that she had turned silence into power. She lifted her badge in her hand, watching it catch the early sunlight. It wasn't just a symbol of her job anymore. It was a reminder that her worth had never depended on recognition from others. And as she slipped it back into her pocket, she whispered to herself, They tried to silence me, but now they will remember my voice. The story of Danielle Carter was never just about a check, a bank, or even an arrest. It was about what happens when prejudice is allowed to walk unchecked in everyday places, where a person's skin color can erase their truth before they ever open their mouth. Danielle had walked into the bank as a professional, a woman with years of service to her country, and yet she was reduced to a stereotype in seconds. That humiliation could have broken her spirit, but instead, it revealed the strength she carried all along. Her silence in the moment of injustice was not weakness, but patience, the kind of patience born from generations of struggle, where dignity becomes a weapon sharper than anger. When the truth came out, it was undeniable. The people who thought they were exposing her had instead exposed themselves, their biases laid bare for the world to see. What makes Danielle's journey so powerful is not just the revelation of her badge, but the reminder that identity, worth, and humanity never depended on that badge. Her dignity was always intact, even when others refused to recognize it. She didn't need to prove her humanity. She only needed to let the system reveal its own flaws. Her courage sent ripples beyond that bank, beyond that police station. It sparked conversations, inspired reform, and reminded ordinary people of an extraordinary truth. Racism does not disappear with silence, but it can be dismantled when truth is spoken with clarity and courage. Danielle became a symbol not of victimhood, but of resilience, the kind that refuses to be erased, even when the world tries. And so, as the sun rose on that morning when she walked free, Danielle carried more than a badge in her hand. She carried the weight of history, the strength of her parents' sacrifices, and the promise of change for those who would come after her. She had faced humiliation, but left with something far greater: respect, justice, and the undeniable truth that no prejudice can erase the power of dignity. Her story is a reminder for us all: when the world tries to silence you, stand taller. Because the moment you choose to rise, the truth will speak louder than any lie.